speaking of the idea of trying to kind of make sure that you're retaining the information, and so you can confirm that you indeed have acquired the characters, have acquired the words. This is an email we got from Chad. So he said, quizzed myself this morning. Without using Anki and being shown the character, I was able to recall both the Chinese and the English at a 95.2% rate, which is basically what he's saying is that Anki, or spaced repetition software in general, the research shows that if you do it based on the correct sort of the best intervals they could come up with based on 100 years of various experiments, it tends to come with a retention rate of between 90 and 95%. And so he quizzed himself without checking Anki in the morning and came up with a 95.2% rate. So the first thing to note about this is nothing's perfect, right? You're never going to remember everything that you put into Anki, but I mean, 95.2% is pretty great, right?
And that 90 to 95%, that's based on, I don't know what sort of, what they actually put on the flashcards to test that. But our flashcards are made in a very engaging way, and obviously you're recalling with images and audio and personal connections, and also the method you're using, for example, for the hands moving method, the stuff you're imagining is very memorable in itself. So maybe on average, we'll be able to get them up to a higher than 90% or 95% on average recall. Which Chad is just sort of, but don't expect that of yourself. But yeah.
So continuing, he says, I'm at 84 characters currently, and with many of them, I no longer require the movie scene. There were some that took a minute, and I had to use the movie scene for a piece or two. There were 4 where I was dead wrong, and it's been pretty much the same ones. So I'll just make a new scene for them. I was a complete beginner when I started and had never used or even heard of memory palaces before. So currently, your claimed rate of 90 to 95 retention is holding. That's great. Obviously, it's an N+1. It's just Chad's experience, but I'm not surprised. The spaced repetition software side of it is the most heavily researched aspect. That's why everybody uses it.
And that's how we've made the guarantee. Is that as long as you follow our instructions, you use Anki or whatever flashcard system we end up applying to the app later on. Yeah. You will be able to retain it.
Yeah, everything about Anki.
Now, how fun it is to recall it and how easy it is to recall it, that's another thing. So that's down to our methods, right? Yeah. So
let's talk about a couple things that he said here.
One of the key things that I mentioned is I no longer require a movie scene, and we've mentioned this a couple of times in previous episodes, but I just want to reiterate that this whole system that you guys will learn. Again, if you're not a customer, you can just go and check out a free trial to understand this memory palace system, but it's very elaborate, at least it seems that way at first, right? So you've got 55 actors you have to choose and think about, 13 locations, not all chosen at the same time, gradually throughout the course. But again, it's a lot of stuff, and then the props, and then the hardest part, or the hardest part for beginners, is creatively bringing it all together and representing the keyword connection, the meaning of the character. It all seems so elaborate. Do I have to do this every time I recall it as well? And it's yes, at first, but the method is purely there just to get the character, or later on the word and grammar points and what have you, into your long-term memory faster and keep it there longer and easier. Yeah. And require less effort to recall because it's just so memorable. That's it. And once it's in your long-term memory, it's now a part of you.
Right.
So that character. You don't have to think about Marilyn Monroe in your grandma's bathroom, dancing around with something. Yeah. It's just that character now, and you just write it and you speak it, and yes, you'll forget bits, but this is actually when I was learning, and I'm sure you found this too, when I was doing this method, the most fun things and satisfying things would be when I'd forget a character temporarily or a part of a character, and I'd jump back into my memory palace. And sometimes I wouldn't even remember I'd forget the pronunciation, but I was I knew it had an EI, so I'd just go into my EI place, and I'll think of the props that are associated with that character, and then it will trigger some neuron connection. Yeah. And I'll remember the character somehow.
That happens all the time, which rote learning doesn't offer to you at all.
And bang, there's no reburned into your memory again.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it's in the ways that are most evolutionarily developed. So visual memory is great. The real key to remember here is that it's a bridge to get to the point where you acquire the words and characters naturally, because Chinese has this major problem for beginners that other languages don't have if they have a Roman alphabet, which is that you can't just start reading early and acquire a character that way. If you see a Spanish word in text 20 times, you'll probably acquire it and not need to, and you'll never need a mnemonic device because you were able to see it. You may use some, but you don't necessarily need it. But in the case of Chinese characters, you need to learn a bunch of characters before you can even have them in basic sentences, much less paragraphs, much less, graded readers. So the point being that because that's the case, you need something to bridge the gap, because you'll forget things really quickly if they don't connect to anything you already know, which is hence why we have the whole memory palace. It's supposed to relate to your past experiences and all of those good memory techniques, but you have to have something that gets you from I don't know anything to I'm reading things in context that is actually effective. So the point here is you do not need to remember these scenes forever. You just need to remember them long enough till you can see the character in enough context that you've got it, in the same way you've got a new vocabulary word in your native language.
And that brings me on to something else, which is, again, I can't help but keep referring back to the Pareto principle now, the 80-20 rule, because we keep talking about it. But it's like Anki itself, or flashcard software, is probably 20% of the results. 80% is the actual method of learning. So in terms of overall retention of information, the learning method is 80%, let's say that.
Yeah.
And Anki is just a reviewing tool, it's 20%. So if you just use Anki without a fun or effective method of learning, you're just rote learning. You're just shoving information into your head, and you will keep it there. That's how I did it on Memrise. I didn't really spend much time creating the mems. I just smashed those digital flashcards every single day, and it stayed there, but it was all hollow. It was empty information.
Essentially what we're saying is that Anki's effective even without these good memory techniques, but it's fun if you have good memory techniques, and the memory techniques themselves make it all the more likely that between the flashcard intervals that you'll remember.
And you'll look forward to doing your cards, which is very important.
So there was another thing that Chad said here that I just thought was worth commenting on, where he said so there were some that took a minute or two that I had to use the movie scene for a piece or two to remember. So that was just compared to not even needing the movie scene. And then there were 4 where I was dead wrong, and it's pretty much the same ones, so I'll just make a new scene for them. And this is the beautiful thing about using mnemonic visualization. Like, we actually saw somebody on Chinese forums the other day trying to defend rote memorization. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to say, because it's like, you can't do that with rote memorization at all. You can't go back and recall the room you're in and see the objects that are in the room and have it trigger all the previous things that you made in that scene. You just have to do it again. If you forget a character you tried to memorize, just go write it another 100 times.
From zero,
it takes way longer. So the recall is very, very helpful when it comes to using mnemonic visualization.
And also, they're known, if you keep getting the same ones wrong, good idea to go and start afresh.
Yeah.
Because maybe you learned it when you weren't in the best of situations, like mentally, or like mood wasn't right, or you just didn't know the method very well at that time.
Yeah.
And these are also known as leeches, I believe.
Yeah, that's what Anki calls them. Yeah.
Anki calls them leeches, where you keep getting the same ones wrong. So, and don't, it's very common for people just to just ignore them then, because it's more effort.
Yeah.
But go and address those early, nip it in the bud. It's a good idea.